Hello, this is Mike Smith. Welcome back to another Maya tutorial. This time we'll be looking at some basic render settings and also how to apply a physical sun and sky lighting setup to our scene. Now it's a nice, easy to use lighting setup which will have some shadows and also a background sky. Now let's have a look at the render settings first. If I go ahead and click on the render current frame button on here at the top in the center of the screen, you'll see by default our render here doesn't show our objects in their smooth form. Now that's because we're rendering with Maya software. If I click on this drop down menu, you can see some default render engines: software, hardware and hardware 2.0. Now even hardware, if I re-render that by clicking on the render button here again in this window, we can see our objects in their smooth form, but this render engine won't let us see the physical sun and sky. We need to use a different render engine called Mental Ray. Now it's not available in this menu yet. We need to activate the plugin. Now you'll have that plugin even if you're using an educational version of Maya like I am here. So to activate this plugin, go to Window, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and you'll see there's lots of different options on here. If I expand this window and I'll scroll down to the bottom, it's the second from the bottom here, Maya Mental Ray Bundle. I'm going to go ahead and tick Loaded and then refresh. Now if you have an older or slower computer, it may freeze for a few seconds when you tick that. Just be patient with the machine and then click on Close. Now if I go to my Render Current Frame button again, in my drop down menu here I have Mental Ray. So I'm going to go ahead and click Mental Ray, re-render that. It may take a second or two longer depending on how fast your machine is. It's smoothed. It won't look necessarily any better than hardware yet, but we can now actually apply our sun and sky. But first, I'll show you some basic render settings. Now, I'll leave this window open, but just move it to one side. I'll go to Window at the top of the screen, Rendering Editors, and Render Settings. Now in here, you'll see you've got lots of different settings. We're just going to look at a few today. From the top, we've got Render Using Mental Ray, and we have the same plugins we just looked at. Leave it on Mental Ray, and in the Common tab, we can actually set our resolution and which camera we want to render with. Now if we scroll down, the default camera is perspective. If you want to see how to render with other cameras, you'll need to put a different camera in. Now have a look at my other tutorials on how to put other cameras in, but for now we'll leave it on perspective. Then we have our image size. Now my preset here is on HD 540, but you can choose lots of different settings on here. There's some very common ones like HD 720 and 1080, and if you scroll down you even have A4, A3 and other different paper sizes. Now I'm going to leave this on the default HD 540 for now, just so it renders nice and fast. And it's always a good idea to leave your resolution quite low to begin with until you're happy, then decide on what output size you need and go ahead and choose, or you can manually type in the width and the height of your render. Okay, so I'm going to leave that on HD 540 for now. I'm going to move this window just out the way and show you one last thing before I put in the sun and sky. Now that, if I actually close these windows down, I can reopen them. That is how to put in what we call a resolution gate, so we know exactly what we're going to get in our scene. Now if I go to View, just under our shelf here, Camera Settings, I then have Resolution Gate. If I go ahead and click on that, it shows me a green frame here, so I know exactly what I'm going to get in my render. It also shows me my resolution at the top, and we can see our camera perspective here at the bottom. Now we can actually look at putting in our sun and sky. So go back to your render settings in Window, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, and we can have a look at some more options in here. Now I'm going to go to Indirect Lighting, and at the top here you've got two types of lighting. For now we can look at physical sun and sky. Go ahead and click on Create, and then close this window down. You'll now find, if you look in the very centre of your grid, you may have to press 4 to go to wireframe. You'll see some arrows. Now these arrows are the direction of your physical sun and sky. I'm going to press 5 again and leave them where they are. And you'll find once you've actually clicked on Create Physical Sun and Sky, you should have your attribute editor open. Now the attribute editor should open automatically. If it doesn't, if it's still blank, or if you still just have your channel box open there, to open your attribute editor, just go to Window, Attribute Editor. Now that just gives us some more information about objects in our scene, and in this case, our sun and sky. We can also open our outliner by going to Window, Outliner, and you'll see in here we've got the different objects in our scene, and then we have this one, Sun Direction. That's our sun and sky. Go ahead and click on that. And then if we have a look in our attribute editor, we've got some different tabs on the top here. We want to look at this one here, Mere Physical Sky 1. Click on that, and you've got some different options. Now you can experiment with these if you want to. It's a good idea to screenshot some of the default settings before you go ahead and experiment, just so you know which ones to put back if it goes wrong. Or just note them down, write them down on a bit of paper, take a photo on your phone if you need to, just so you know which ones you've played around with. Now, if we go ahead and render that as it is without adjusting anything, we'll see what we get. So go ahead and click on your Render Current Frame button. It may take a few more seconds. There we go. So we've got some light in our scene, we've got some shadows, but we have this grey background. Now that's actually your horizon. If I rotate my scene around a little bit, if I look down a little bit there and re-render that, you should see a lower horizon and more blue sky. There you go, so it looks more natural. Now, I find this horizon quite ugly. So you've got some options here. You can either make the floor of your scene much bigger, or, even easier, just to drop that horizon, you can lower that. Now, I'll move this window out of the way for a second. Make sure you have your sun direction selected in your outliner. In your attribute editor, select Mere Physical Sky 1, and then you can have a look at this setting here, horizon height. It's currently 0, but if I type in a negative number, now don't get carried away, type in a small number first of all, maybe 2, -2, and then re-render that and see how it looks. You should find that horizon's dropped. There you go, so we've got a much nicer background. We can still see this grey in the foreground, so you'll need to either go in closer to your object or expand your plane on the floor just to see this a bit better. Now we can also have a look at these arrows. If I press 4 to go to wireframe, make sure your arrows are selected, and we can use our rotate tool to adjust their position. So I'm going to go ahead and position that round quite far, as if the sun's coming in just above the horizon. So it's coming in here from the top left corner, coming down to our objects. Now I'll leave it in wireframe just so you can see these arrows, and if I go ahead and render that there, you'll see how this looks. Again, it might take a few seconds, so just be patient with your computer. But you can see these shadows have changed dramatically, and our sky's also changed too. Now you'll find this is like a real life sun and sky, hence the name physical sun and sky. And if you get it right, you can get some really interesting effects, and you can actually see almost a sunrise and a sunset. So if I rotate these arrows around a bit more and render that again, you've got a slightly different result. Now keep playing around with this and you'll get some really nice looking skies and some nice moody looking shadows. And sometimes just small adjustments make a big difference. So there you go, I've got a bit of yellow and a bit of orange coming in here, and you can even see the sun. Now, if you want to save your render, when your render view window is open, all you need to do is go to File, Save Image, and then you need to actually choose a file type. So click on the drop down menu here and you can choose lots of different types. The common one, JPEG, you even have a PSD, there's lots of other ones on here. You've even got a TIFF as well if you want something that's uncompressed. So remember to choose which file type you want, save it, and then go ahead and try a different render. Okay, so keep practicing, try something new, be patient with your machine, it might take a while to render on high resolutions, and remember to save as you go along.